Welcome to my backyard. Sorry we couldn't meet together tonight, but I still thought it was important for us to get together some way, even online or in a video, and study the scripture together because I really do believe that you were created on purpose for a purpose, that there are no mistakes, that God chose you, He wired you, He created you, and He wants you to experience this abundant life that Jesus promises. And the only way we can experience that life is by studying His Word and studying it together. And so tonight I want to talk to you about one of the biggest dangers that you will face when it comes to living the abundant life that Jesus has for you. And the biggest dangers that you will face is called temptations. Now, temptation is a word that we probably all know, but it really is dangerous. It is one of the enemy's greatest weapons against us, followers of Jesus, living out the life that God has called us to. We want to talk about temptation. So we're going to start in the Bible in James chapter 1, starting in verse 13. James says this: "No one undergoing a trial should say, 'I am being tempted by God,' since God is not tempted by evil, and He Himself does not tempt anyone. But each person is tempted when he is drawn away and enticed by his own evil desires." Students, here's the truth. All of us, you will face temptations. You already have, I'm sure of it. And temptation is that desire inside of us to do something that we know is bad for us, and we know is wrong for us, so it's unhealthy for us. And you've experienced that before, that desire to do something that you know would ultimately cost you, that you know would ultimately hurt you. For example, I bet all of you can think of a time where you were arguing with your parents and you had this phrase, like this perfect phrase, this perfect thing to say that you knew would just set your parents off, and you were so angry in the moment that you didn't care really about the consequences. You just wanted to say the thing that would hurt them or make them angry. And you wanted to, even though you knew it would cost you later on. That's that temptation, the desire to do something that you know you shouldn't do. Maybe it's in relationships. Maybe you've dated someone before, or you're near someone that you know is unhealthy. You know that when you're around them, they pull you away from the life that God has for you. They pull you away from the joy that you can experience in Jesus, but there's something inside you that just says, I like it still. That's that temptation. It's the internal desire to do something that you know is ultimately wrong for you. It can be experiences or situations or circumstances. You're like, I shouldn't go to this house. I shouldn't be with these people. But this thing inside of me is pulling me back to it. We all face temptations. James says it comes from within. It's an internal desire that leads us into this place of temptation. But here's why temptations are so dangerous, because giving in to your temptations can take you out. Listen to what James says in verse 15. He says that desire has been conceived, that desire gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. Sin, this thing inside of us that separates us from God, it starts with giving into temptation. It grows inside of us, and it becomes full grown, and then it leads to death. Giving in to temptation, it will take you out. Students, in fact, I bet I'm not going to name names or give you a list of different people, but I guarantee you that all of you can think of celebrities who were the best at what they did, who were wealthy, who were successful, but ultimately gave into temptation over and over again and lost everything. It's happened with musicians and athletes. It happens with people on film and in the media. And y'all know this happens in the church all the time. You can think of pastors and preachers and Christian celebrities, Christ followers who have massive followings of their own, who have lost their influence, have lost their platforms because they have given into temptation over and over again. Giving into temptation will ultimately take you out. That is why it is so dangerous. And James warns us about this. Watch out for temptation. And so the question is, what do we do? If temptation is so dangerous, this internal desire to do something that we know is wrong for us, and if we give in to temptation over and over again, it will eventually take us out. It will cause us to miss out on some of the things that God wants for us. What should our response be? How do we battle against temptation? So I think a lot of us think our goal is to become really strong. Like our goal is to become strong enough to resist temptation, that you can be around the things that you know are tempting to you. You should be around the person who you know pulls you away from Jesus. But if you're just strong enough, if you had enough faith, if you just tried hard enough, then you would be strong enough to resist that temptation. Or maybe it's going to parties, or it's being around this crowd, or it's saying these words. But whatever the temptation is, a lot of times we think our job, our goal, is to be strong enough to resist those temptations. But man, what if that doesn't work? In fact, I bet some of you have experienced this before. You say, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to be with this person again. I'm not going to go to that party again. I'm not going to watch this stuff anymore. I'm going to stay away from this temptation. And you tried really hard, but you just fell back into it. It happens over and over again. Why do I keep experiencing? I say I don't want to do this again, but I keep doing it over and over and over again. Maybe because our goal isn't to be strong enough to resist temptation. Maybe there's a better technique, something else that we should do. In fact, in 2 Timothy, Paul was writing to a young church leader, and he gives this piece of wisdom that is so valuable in our battle against temptation. He says this, 2 Timothy 2, verse 22, he says, flee from youthful temptations and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. This is God's strategy for how we deal with temptations. We all face temptations. That's a desire to do something that we know is unhealthy, that we know is wrong, that we know is bad for us. And giving into that temptation over and over again will take us out. We'll miss out on what God is doing in our lives, what He wants for us. But God has a strategy for us, and we find it in 2 Timothy. He says, flee from youthful temptations. Flee from it. See, students, our goal is not to become strong enough to resist temptation. Our goal is to become wise enough to flee from it, to run from it. Whenever we see it, whenever we experience it, whatever it is, it could be in a bottle, it could be in a person, it could be in the words we say or the things we watch. Whenever we see the temptation that's close to us, God says, I hope that you are wise enough to run from it, to flee from it, to run in the complete opposite direction. Our goal is not to be strong enough to resist temptation. Our goal, students, is to be wise enough to flee from temptation. Jesus created you on purpose, for a purpose. In John 10:10, He says that He's come so that you could have life and life in abundance, overflowing life. He also says you have an enemy. And his goal was to steal and to kill and to destroy. And one of the enemy's favorite weapons to use against you is temptation. And if we could become better at fleeing from it, then we would experience more of that abundant life that Jesus has for us. Now, I know fleeing isn't a word that we use a lot. I can't think of the last time you fled from anyone. In fact, I think the only time I ever hear people use the word fleeing or fled is when they talk about police, like the suspect fled on foot. But that's the image that Paul is using. Flee from temptation. Run away from it with abandon. Like, run away from it as fast as you can. If you can't picture maybe what that looks like, what fleeing looks like, just watch this really short video of a little kid who encountered a dinosaur for the first time. And I think his response is what we should respond, or how we should respond when we experience temptations in our lives. Check this out.
Careful, Zach. There could be dinosaurs.
Zach, what is that?
Run, Zach.
What is it? Is it a T-Rex? Is it? Are you scared? Zach, hurry, come back!
Come back.
I hope you guys thought that video was as funny as I do. I don't know if I only think it's funny because I'm a dad now, and I like to scare my kids, but I love that little kid. He takes so long. He stares at the dinosaur for so long, and then he finally decides, I don't want to be here, and he runs, and he does not stop. He doesn't care. That's what fleeing looks like. And our goal, students, when it comes to temptations and how dangerous they are, our goal is to flee from them. In fact, I want you to practice fleeing. Run from it. Even if people think you're crazy, run from those temptations, because what God has for you is so much better than what you will experience if you just keep giving in to those temptations over and over again. Our goal is not to be strong enough to resist temptations. It's to be wise enough to flee from them, to run in the opposite direction. And here's what's so amazing about the God that we serve and the Jesus that we worship and the Spirit who lives inside of us. It's this: we don't just run from temptations or struggles or trials. We don't run from those things And that's the end of the story. We flee from temptations so that we can run towards Jesus. You don't just abandon temptations behind you. You run away from them with abandon so that you can run closer to Jesus, because he is the source of the life that we all desire to live. He is the life. He is the truth. And as we practice fleeing from our temptations, we want to practice running towards Jesus with everything that we've got. So we all face temptations. Giving into those temptations will take you out. Our goal is to be wise enough to flee from the temptations and run towards Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith.